Hi, this is Longvo, and today I'm analyzing my game on May 29th, 2012 in the Burlington Chess Club. I'm playing white and I'm rated 1354, and my opponent is Giuseppe Del Duca, rated 1392. So this is a bit of a strange game because I think I made a lot of mistake as a beginner, and so did my opponent. And somehow in the end, I ended up winning by luck, almost. So let's get started. So I go e4. He replies e5. I go knight f3, attacking his e-pawn. He defends with d6. So that's kind of a strange move to me because he's restricting his dark square bishop. So I go bishop c4, attacking the f7 pawn, and he goes pawn to h6. So that's another strange move because at this point I can't really go my knight there because of the queen, and my the file here is not open for my bishop for the diagonal. So I thought that was kind of a strange move from him. I continued development, knight to c3. He goes knight to f6. So I open up the diagonal for the bishop. So d4, also challenging the center. E takes d, knight takes d, knight takes d4. Then he goes c5, attacking my knight. So right there I think is also a bad move for weakening his d6 pawn here. So now I go knight to f5, and so I figured that he's already moved this pawn, so maybe I should tempt him to attack my knight further and weakening his king side. And I had this little outpost there, so the only way he could really kick my knight away is either with the taking with the bishop, which I don't think is a good exchange for him, or moving the g pawn, which would then create a weakness on the king side. So then he takes bishop to takes f5. E takes f5. So now this is a weak pawn for me, but I think now I still have my bishop pair and he doesn't. So he goes bishop to e7. Now I go knight to d5. I think that's a weak move because I think I should have developed instead, because the knight can't really do anything there. I guess my idea was to get rid of the other bishop as well. He castles kingside. Then I develop the bishop to f4. He develops his knight to d7. Then I go queen to d2 with the idea of castling kingside. Okay, so the reason is because I want to be more aggressive on the attacking the king side. So he goes king to h7. So at this point I still don't understand why. I think it's a waste of a move, because it's not really completing the development, and I don't think his king is under attack or anything like that. So so I castle queenside. So he goes a6. I guess it's right after I castled. I figured he would start a pawn storm on the queen side. which that made sense to me. So then rook to e1 in the open file. I guess I was applying too much pressure here, right? So the bishop is totally restricted, and there's nothing he can do to move it, or he could have defended with the rook, but I guess he felt a bit of pressure, so he took with the f knight. So knight takes d5. Bishop takes d5. So I'm happy with my bishop pair. So he goes bishop to f6. So I didn't really see that threat there, but I guess the idea here is to develop the queen out. So I think that's a good move, and plus it sort of blockades my isolated pawn. So then the pawn is hanging, so I take bishop takes d6, threatening the rook. And here he plays a good move, queen to b6, threatening my dark square bishop and threatening checkmate as well. My only move, I guess it's retreating the light square bishop to b2, b3. Now he develops his rook to e8, offering an exchange. So if I took and he takes, if I took here and he takes back, then he has the control of the e file. So I decided to go pawn to c3, creating a barrier to his dark square bishop, and also giving an escape route for my light square bishop. So then he takes, rook takes e1, and I take back, rook takes e1. He goes queen to c6. So I guess he's maybe freeing up for this pawn to advance, or he has the idea of advancing this pawn, threatening my bishop. So I think this is a bad move from me. So f4, I'm not sure why. Or maybe I wanted to create an outpost here so that I could somehow exchange bishops. So he advances to c4, threatening my light square bishop. But now that the threat of the queen is no longer, no more pressure on the b pawn, then I could safely retreat my bishop to c2. And this is also x-raying the king. So he goes knight to c5. So here he does have potential outpost here, and I'm starting to feel a little bit of pressure towards my king. So now I exchange, I offer the exchange of the bishop. So bishop to e7. And he pins the bishop to the rook. So he goes rook e8. And I exchange. Bishop takes f6. And he takes my rook. Rook takes e1. I recapture. Queen takes e1. Then I guess I thought I could mess up his pawns here, but I forgot that the queen could also take. So he takes queen takes f6. So at this point, the position is I'm leading by one pawn. He has a bit more space in this area, and it's a bit more aggressive. I'm not really attacking his king, and I don't like my double pawns here. So I go queen to e5, attacking the knight, and I guess offering an exchange and trying to undouble my pawns. So he doesn't want to exchange, so he goes queen to c6, threatening my g-pawn. So I push f6 with a discovered attack, check on the king. So then he blocks with his knight in the outpost, also checking my king. So bishop takes d3 and c takes d3. So now this becomes an isolated pawn, which is quite important for him because it's a passed pawn and it's quite advanced in the board, putting a lot of pressure. So at this point, I thought that getting rid of that pawn was probably more important than advancing this pawn, because I wasn't sure afterwards how I could defend it. So I go queen f5 check. So he advances his pawn to block, and blocking this pawn. So looking back, I think maybe capturing there would really mess up his pawns, and this is an extra pawn for me, right? And it's really a weak pawn, so maybe I should have done that. So now I take queen takes d3, and now this g pawn is also hanging. So actually I thought this whole thing was a bad move from my part, because now he messes up my pawns. Oh, actually he decides to take the f6 pawn instead. So offering another exchange, queen to d4, and also protecting the f pawn. So he doesn't want to exchange yet, so queen to e6, threatening the a2 pawn. So I push c4. I think that's a bad move, because now I'm really not isolating, but the pawn is sort of unprotected here, which becomes a future weakness. Perhaps advancing this pawn would have made more sense. So he delivers check, queen to e1. So I block with the queen, queen to d1, and now this pawn is hanging. Queen to e3 check, and I block again, queen to d2, and at this point I didn't really realize that I should have really tried to exchange the queen and not really give him the initiative, because I was just panicking at this point, and you'll see later that he delivers a couple of checks and starts eating my pawns. So it's a really I'm in a really bad situation here. So instead of moving my king, which I thought would have been perhaps a bit smarter, I tried to I was playing desperate, trying to exchange queens. So he goes queen to g1 check, and he's gonna win this pawn here. So now I move my king, king to c2, then queen takes h2. So one pawn down for no compensation whatsoever is just a bad mistake, and it also shows the power of the queen. So now queen to d5, I guess threatening this pawn, and this pawn as well. But what I didn't see was, this pawn was hanging, so I think he should have just captured and protecting this pawn, because right now one of them has to go, right? So he should have captured, and then he would have gained a pawn. Instead, he starts panicking as well, and he goes king to g7. But now this pawn is hanging, and I didn't really see it. So I go queen takes b7. It comes down to the same thing. So queen takes f4. So not too bad. We're equal in material. I think I have a good advantage here with my passed pawn. He does have 3 connected pawns here, and he could easily create a passed pawn, but I'm much more advanced down the board, so I have a huge advantage here, but I don't see it because I'm just not that experienced right now. And you know, when you're playing, you do get emotional and you get scared, and you don't really think, and sometimes you do have the time, but it's just something makes you act quickly for some reason, especially me. So I've made a lot of blunders that way, and I think as I grow as a chess player, I'm gonna learn to control my emotions better and take my time, and especially when there's no real time pressure here. There's plenty of time left. So queen to d5, protecting both pawns, but I think I should have perhaps advanced the pawn here instead. But anyways, that's the move I chose. He goes h5. So he's starting to push his pawns. And now I push b4, which I think it's a really bad move, because at this point, you know, if I keep advancing the pawn here, you know, there's nothing his king can do to stop it, because the queen is blocking the d file. You know, if he keeps checking me, you know, the queen is protecting the g pawn, and if he keeps checking me, then I can actually advance my king further towards protecting my pawn and attacking his pawn. So I just, you know, that was just a terrible move. So now he goes king to f6. So I think at this point I should have exchanged queens here. So if I did this, then pinning his queen, he has no choice really. So then I can recapture, but then that leaves him with a passed pawn, and perhaps that's why I didn't do that. But the move that I chose was pawn to b5, attacking his pawn, and if he takes, then I would sort of gain a tempo here. So he has no choice really, because or else I simply push the pawn past him, and then he's in big trouble. So a takes b, c takes b. So I'm happy. So now I have 2 connected passed pawns over here. So then he goes queen to a4 check. My queen is really protecting all 3 pawns here, so I think I should have moved my king. So once again I panic. Queen to b3, offering the exchange. So now so he goes queen to e4 check, and there goes my g pawn. So you know, now I move my king to c3. Queen takes g2. So that's my last hope, you know, pushing the b pawn. So b6, queen to c6, delivering check. And of course I don't want to disrupt the communication between the queen and the pawn, so so I go king to b2. So I'm really playing badly at this point, giving him the initiative all the time. not really doing anything with my queen. So it's just the queen is really passive at this point because perhaps I should try to do what he's doing and checking the king and trying to create some tactics. So that's where my lack of experience really hurt me. So he blockades my pawn, queen to b7. So now I check him. Queen to c3 check, and that's just giving him that opportunity to bring the king into the defense here, and his pawns are connected, so they're sort of protecting themselves. So I keep protecting my pawn. So queen to d4, also blocking the d files, because I do recognize that if his king gets too close to the pawn, then I'm in big trouble. So he goes f6. He can't really advance his pawns here, but I thought this move would have made more sense. But f6 is okay, because if he went here, then I could simply deliver check and win the queen. So now I push the a pawn. Now he pushes his g pawn. So g5, a5. So the queen blockades that pawn. And my lack of experience again. I should have played c3 check because I have an outpost here, right? So if he if he moves, or if he tries to attack, then I have my outpost here. Check again, and he has to run. Now it's really he's in big trouble right now. So I think he can start trying some tactics here, but my queen is really defending both, so there's not much he can do, and he can keep checking me, and eventually I'll find a hiding spot somewhere behind the pawn. So if I played that way, I would have won, I think, easily. But instead, panicking again, and trying to protect this pawn, I played queen b4, and really opening the d file here for his king. So he gets closer. So king d7. So now I'm starting to panic. I'm like, well, okay, so keep pushing the pawn. That's my last hope. So pawn to b7. So I guess that he needs to find a way to stop my pawn, because the next move is a queening move. So he starts to deliver checks. So queen to e2 check, king to a3, queen to d3 check, king to a4. So he's getting closer to my king, and I do feel the pressure. So queen to c2 check, and at this point, I start to panic, but at least I didn't go here, because that would have been actually, that's not that's checkmate basically, right? So I saw that move at least, so I went king to a3, and I guess this would have been a potential draw if he keeps checking me perpetually. So he checks me here, and you see, that's like I knew that if in my mind I knew that if he exchanges queens, then he wins. But I guess he was panicking as well, and he didn't see that. So my correct move should have been king to a2 and just let him have that perpetual check. Okay, so if he keeps checking me, then I can't allow him to trade queens at this time, because if we do that, so let's say he exchanges queens, so all he has to do is king here, and he wins, right? So I could protect the pawn, then he would just blockade the pawn. I mean, there's not much I can do here. So if I check, he takes queen, he takes, and then he has three connected pawns. So the move that I played, oops, sorry. Okay, so check here, and this move would have been, if he saw that, if he understood that if he has an exchange here, then he would win the game, right? Then I would have lost. So he would just go here. There's not much I can do. Goes here. Well, perhaps I could have done something, but then he's too far ahead, and I guess you know, either one going. Oh, actually, this could be a checkmate, right? So if he goes here, it's checkmate. So yeah, so maybe exchanging queens was not yeah, I guess he had no choice really, right? So, or maybe I'm not analyzing this correctly, but anyways, he didn't exchange. He kept checking me, I guess. And then I went d4, check, check. Now I knew that if I went here and he checks me here, then he, you know, the game's over for him, because then there's no other way he can check me when I move my king back. So so that was my gamble. So I knew that as I got closer to his king, he may be tempted to check me this way, which he did. And when I went back, he realized that he couldn't really check me anymore, because the queen was protecting the king here. He couldn't check here, couldn't check here. There was nothing else he could do, and then my next move would have been queening move. So he checked me here, and then he resigned. And that's my game, and I think that's a really bad end game for me, because I didn't understand that you know, the position that I had was better, and I really let my emotions take over, and you know, when you play these games, sometimes after 4 hours you're like exhausted, so you're not thinking that well as well. So that's my game, and I hope you guys learned something from that. Okay, so thanks.